they agreed to pay me significantly more money on an existing contract. And whether it's upstream, midstream, or downstream, I fervently believe that what we've done with that funding is put ourselves in a position where we can move very quickly if we see an opportunity to add great value.
Global supply chains are being redrawn in real time. Governments are rethinking resource security. Manufacturers are questioning decades of dependence on a single jurisdiction. And critical minerals have moved from mining conferences into cabinet meetings and boardrooms around the world. Few commodities tell that story better than tungsten. Once viewed as a niche industrial metal, tungsten now sits at the intersection of defense, aerospace, semiconductors, energy infrastructure, and advanced manufacturing. As Western nations race to secure reliable supply, companies capable of producing outside of China are finding themselves at the center of a much bigger geopolitical conversation. Welcome to the Market Frontlines. I'm your host, Lyndsay Malchuk. Returning to the conversation is someone who has spent years making the case that tungsten isn't just another commodity here. Lewis Black has built Almonty Industries into one of the few companies positioned to supply Western markets at a time when governments, manufacturers, and defense industries are all rethinking where critical minerals come from. Now, with Sangdong entering production, major financing secured, and expansion underway in both Portugal and the United States, the conversation's no longer about potential. It's about execution and whether the market is keeping pace with just how strategic this company has become. Lewis, it's great to have you back. It's been a hot minute.
You know, there are two things you said I'm not happy about. One, that it was a niche metal. It was only niche to those who didn't know. Everyone else who works with it, it was a primary metal. So this niche metal is not a fair justification given how many uses it's actually, how many things it's used in. And the other thing was that I spent years doing this. That implies I'm aging. And quite frankly, I'm trying to remain youthful as long as possible because quite the amount of work I have to put in, I need that energy. So apart from that, I was very happy with that introduction.
Okay, great. Well, I always look at you as Benjamin Button. You always reverse in age, so you don't have to worry about that.
No. These are the filters they put on these Zoom things. If I switch them off, you think you'd be on the phone to Father Christmas. The white beard will be right out. So don't give me the credit. This is all technology. I love AI. I love it because it uses lots of tungsten, and I love it because it makes me look great.
Okay, well, right out of the gate, there we go. I think that's the interview right there. We don't need to talk about anything else. Now, Lewis, here's where I would like to actually start with financing. And I want to start there because I think this deserves a lot more attention than it's actually received. Now, Almonty recently secured that $800 million convertible bond. And when people hear that number, they naturally focus on the headline. But what really caught my attention was the structure here. So in a very capital-intensive industry where financing often becomes very diluted, like heavily diluted, or comes with restricted terms, this appears to give the company considerable flexibility while supporting long-term growth. So help us understand this, Lewis. What made these terms so attractive? Was this simply about raising capital, or does this financing reflect how institutional investors now view strategic tungsten assets in a very increasingly geopolitical world?
Well, first and foremost, you remember, I'm a large shareholder, so I don't like doing anything that's going to affect the value of my stock. And so I like it when it goes up, not so much when it goes down. And certainly I don't like dilution. So when we structured this funding, we were taking full advantage of the fact that firstly, the industrial base in tungsten have always been very supportive over the years. And now the major institutions are supporting us to sort of take this up and on to the next level. And the structure on a very high level, because it's quite complicated. It's lucky I've got people like Guillaume de la Mazière as my chief development officer. He's much smarter than I am, but he's able to then really translate some of my crazy thinking into real kind of structural policy. But at a very high level, it's a fixed rate, 2.25% notes, unsecured, 5-year term. And with the cap call that we worked with Goldman Sachs and Bank of America, we don't see any dilution until $41 US. stock. So we're going to dilute roughly 7, just over 7% dilution for $800 million US.
Wow, that's
And
phenomenal.
so it was the thinking behind it was obviously, there was Iran and there was a wobble in the market, all these things. And I always believe that if you have, money in the bank when there's blood in the streets, who knows what value opportunities present themselves to you in your sector? I'm not leaving my lane. I know tungsten, I know moly, molybdenum, that's it. Anything else, I'm a complete moron. But those are the two metals that I really understand, both the buyers, the sellers, the mines, the geology, the processing, and whether it's upstream, midstream, or downstream. I fervently believe that what we've done with that funding is put ourselves in a position where we can move very quickly if we see an opportunity to add great value.
Right.
And that's what people have to remember. We're not doing this for an award, although quite frankly, they probably deserve one. But we're doing this to add value, because the only reason I go through all of this, drama of building, growing, and building and growing is because I'm first and foremost a shareholder. And when we had to decide who was going to do it, everyone left the room and left me to it. So it was important that people remember we're driven by value, not by headline.
Fair enough. Yeah. Well, and we also know financing is really just the fuel of it all. Investors ultimately want to know what changes once that capital starts working. So you've spent years convincing investors that Sangdong would become one of the world's most important tungsten assets. Now you're dealing with customers and governments and strategic partners who can actually see the production on the horizon. So has the conversation changed, Lewis? I mean, who's calling today that wasn't calling 2 years ago?
Well, to be honest, I think all the same people are calling. They've always called. We've never not been part of that loop. What's happening now, there's greater coordination. And in many ways, we are being asked to provide solutions, whether conceptually or physical solutions, on a larger scale for more people at the same time. So it doesn't mean, I'm not saying that the industrial base is pivoted just to Almonty and everyone else, let's see what happens. But certainly we're seeing the level of commitment, of conviction commitment, has dramatically increased in the last 2 years. A case in point, we just extended the offtake in Korea with our offtaker for 45% of our output at the GEP plant C. And yes, we increased the length of it because, well, they know 21 years is really a kind of blip and how much material we have there. But the real takeaway, and I didn't really belabor it, but I think it's important as an investor, you see this, they agreed to pay me significantly more money on an existing contract. So they have a contract at a price A. And they wanted to extend it. So I said, I can extend it, but I need a price B for the entire contract. And they said, Lewis, what can we say? You've always been cheap. You've always done this to us. Yes, we'll do it. And that really sends a message, I think, to the wider investor community. One, the only reason somebody does that of that size is because they need the material and their confidence in all these new projects coming online is perhaps not as they're not as convinced as perhaps they would like to be. They wanted to make sure they had that extra 6 years. And if they had to pay what amounts in this price of $35 million more a year, which is just basically straight onto our earnings, so be it. They essentially paid to play. And I think that really is the difference of what we're seeing. We could have really gouged all these guys, but we've worked together for so long. You got to act with civility because they were there when we needed them, when things were tough.
Yeah.
And we are there for them now when things are tough for them. That's how partnerships work. You don't have to be best friends. You don't have to go to each other's weddings or you basically, or even get Christmas presents. And by the way, I don't get any, which I'm not very happy about, but that's another conversation for another day. But
we can unpack that later.
It's an effort together. And those that work together, these partnerships will emerge much stronger and take much more market share. Because all you really have in China is an enormous government partnership. That's why they were so effective. We in the West always had this, let's do it solo, me and no one else. But it's
Right.
changed in tungsten. So we're working with all of the major consumers, and we're finding independent solutions for them as best we can, as we try and all work, with a greater concentration of togetherness. It sounds quite spiritual. It's not, because I'm sure in 3 or 4 years, they'll all go back to trying to stab me. But for now, we are all building market share, and that's very important.
And that's true. I mean, tungsten is such an important asset to have. As you mentioned earlier, when you were displeased with my introduction, it's always been an everyday item that people don't really realize how much of it they use every single day. And when you do those partnerships, it is heavily relying on the trust, on the loyalty, on all of those things that bring that into fruition to create a company like Almonty. It's fascinating to me.
Well, if you
Now,
think, well, just because I know you're upset about my previous comment,
I'm very upset.
it stung me for a little bit, but I'm over it already. But I think what's important to remember is that if you've been feeding from China for the best part of 20 plus years, and now you've lost access, the first psychological journey you take is, why me? What did I do? This isn't my fight. I've always been a good customer. I've always paid on time. There's this kind of almost belligerent anger that this could happen. But they forget that they were really just part of a stepping stone for China as they migrated away from the upstream more toward the downstream. And no one likes to feel they kind of got used. But hey, we've got through that now, and now we have to come up with pragmatic, medium to long-term solutions. And I think, and we have to, as I said, we work together, but there are groups in the West, like traders, and they do a fantastic job, traders, but my goodness, they're not terribly helpful in what we're trying to do. They're all, so there's lots of different people pulling in different directions. So we're trying to get our core group of customers, and together we're trying to punch through it.
Love that. Well, one thing that has always stood out for me with Almonty is that this story is much, much bigger than just a single mine. I mean, you're expanding the Panasqueira in Portugal mine, you're advancing the Montana project in the US, and you're now operating a world where secure supply is becoming just as important as production itself. So when governments, defense contractors, and industrial buyers all start knocking on your door all at the same time, how does that change how you build the business, Lewis?
Well, no, I mean, you have existing relationships, and you also have relationships that are important to develop, especially domestically in Korea. Because you can say, oh, they're just supplying Korea because they're trying to play nice. Nothing to do with it. I'm not a really nice playing person, but I'm doing it because you cannot have a better customer than a domestic customer. I mean, someone who is 2 hours drive from you, he loves it, she loves it, I love it, and it makes good, pragmatic, commercial sense. You have a domestic customer, that is a sticky customer. As long as you do your job, he will never or she will never leave you. And that, to me, the opportunity to supply domestically in any territory I work in is extremely interesting to me. If I can avoid borders, transport, bill of ladens, just compounding of nonsense, boats that stop off from different ports to visit girlfriends rather than deliver containers, I'd rather just put it on the back of a truck, give the guy a cup of coffee and say, go that way, and it's done. So
That's right.
we are fostering and developing new relationships in our domestic markets where we produce.
Well, what's the saying? Keep it super simple. There we go.
Yeah.
Right? There we go.
F is
Okay,
simple,
so that
simple and
actually
mining.
brings me to something that actually surprised quite a few people. And the company is, what surprised me here is actually the company made the decision to delist from both the TSX and the ASX. Now, for some investors, that initially raised quite a few questions. Yet at the same time, Lewis, you've been attracting increasingly sophisticated institutional capital and positioning the company for a very different stage of growth. Can you walk us through the thinking behind those decisions? Were those moves about simplifying the capital structure or concentrating liquidity or preparing Almonty for where you believe the company belongs over the next decade?
Well, first, I'd like to point out at the beginning of your statement, the surprise that we actually made a decision. So I'd like to point out that, in fact, we are actually rather efficient at making decisions because we're not committee driven.
Yeah.
And much as I've copped, some criticism over the years for making decisions, I also somebody who can pivot very quickly if it's the wrong decision. I'm never married to a decision if it doesn't go the way I'd hoped it would, and I can just pivot to a different way.
Right.
It was
Absolutely.
always planned to delist from ASX and TSX as our liquidity migrated naturally onto the NASDAQ. And even though there's a cost associated and we have good friends in both territories who were holding stock in those territories, and so we had long conversations with them about migrating it over to the NASDAQ. The reality is that the ASX has always been low liquidity anyway. We can't compete with the Australian tungsten mines because they're so much better than we are. Or that's what they tell me.
Wink.
On a regular basis. Let them have it. But in the TSX, our liquidity dropped to less than 10% of our daily volume. And so it made no sense to stay there. We've been there a long time. It was the right time to do it. Should I have done both at the same time? Because we took a bit of a beating in the market. I don't know, probably not. But I always believe you've got to rip the Band-Aid off. Just get rid of it. Rip them off. I think we've announced Australia will be gone. We think we get halted August 28th and we're gone September 1st. I believe one of the Australian tungsten companies there is holding a party to celebrate. I wasn't invited.
Send flowers.
Oh, no, I'm going to send a wreath.
Lewis Black.
Sorry.
Okay, I want to zoom out here just for a moment because this conversation is definitely much bigger than the one company you have. Now, for decades, companies have optimized for the cheapest supply. Today, it feels like they're optimizing for the most reliable supply. How does that change the value of a company like Almonty?
Well, I think first and foremost, if you look at our performance in Portugal, which is she's an old creaking girl, 136 years now. She's still going, slow and steady. And if you look at our earnings and our revenue generation from that project and how much we produce, it very much, shows that we are first and foremost extremely lean. We've been educated and grown up in an environment where you only survive through innovation and discipline. And that hasn't changed in the company. So when I look at projects, I look at not just its longevity, I look at its viability, its geology, its cost basis, because in my mind, I have to always prepare for the fact that the last 20 years happened, last 30 years happened, and I have to keep that mindset. And if I keep that mindset, which I can assure you I'm going to, it means that we will generate outsized margins in this price environment. Everyone can look heroic in this price. But if you use our Portuguese mine as the benchmark, you have to ask yourself the question, how come this mine, which is really 1/5 of the grade that we have in Korea, is an old, creaking, expensive mine to operate? How come it still generates greater margin than any other tungsten company that's producing in the West? And it's not a criticism of other tungsten companies. They do what they do. I'm just saying that's how we should be judged. We have to stay lean to maximize margin because there's no one else really coming up behind us anytime soon. And on that basis, we have an opportunity to generate a vast amount of earnings from our projects. And someone asked me, what do you do with this money? Well, I'll park enough money to generate a passive yield to cover my SG&A costs because I hate SG&A costs. And my new CFO, who's extremely good and extremely diligent, is spending money building out this whole internal controls and the C-suite. And I'm getting gray hair at the thought of what this is costing, but it's a nest. We have to do it. It has to be done.
You have to do it.
And the rest, going back to the fact that I'm a shareholder, it's coming back to me, which means I have to share it with the rest of the shareholders because we don't need an enormous war chest. It's unnecessary. We have enough to develop what we currently with the molybdenum, with the tungsten oxide, with Montana, with what we're working on with USG, with expansion in Portugal, with phase 2 in Korea. We have more than enough sufficient internally already. If an opportunity comes up, that's different. But right now, my plan is I want to get their money back in my pocket. And of course, I have to give it to all the shareholders, not just me. So, but I think that's an important distinction. I'm not going to start hoarding money.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's a great plan to have. And I'm so glad that we had a chance to catch up again. It's been definitely, like I said, a hot minute. And it's always a fascinating conversation. So come back soon and keep us updated.
Thanks, Lyndsay. Love your new office. Glad they gave you some windows.
Yes, me too. Again, that was Lewis Black, President and CEO of Almonty Industries, trading on the NASDAQ under ALM. For years, the conversation around critical minerals was about finding them. Today, it's about who controls them, who can deliver them, and who can be trusted to keep them flowing when the world needs them most. Maybe that's the bigger question investors should be asking here. In the next era of global manufacturing, will the most valuable resource be the mineral itself, or confidence in where it comes from? Thanks for joining us on the Market Frontlines. I'm Lyndsay Malchuk. We'll see you next time.